Hello, this is Mark Tucker.
And I'm Alan Furstenberg. Welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
How's it going, Mark?
It's going fine. Yeah.
Good to hear. What have you been up to recently? Anything exciting?
Oh man, just continuing on. I've got a side project that I'm working on that's getting close to being released. So once it is, I'll tell everybody about it. But things are going that well there, and at work, lots of stuff to code.
Tell me about it. I know exactly what you mean about both side projects and work projects. So your interview last week, you're doing some great interviews these days.
Oh, it was a good experience. I don't know, I just really felt like I should open up about some of my voice journey and, and the ups and the downs. We all have them, and just trying to be out there. Maybe it helps somebody who's struggling as well know that they're not the only one out there.
No, I agree. Development as a whole it's always, constantly shifting and constantly trying to find what works for you, and then watching everything change suddenly. So it's always an experience.
Yeah, one of the experiences that I've been thinking about recently is in the terms of authentication. So at work we have a project, and this isn't our only time that I've hit a project where we've had authentication and wanting to use account linking. But we also wanted to try to use something new from Alexa called app account linking. And we ended up not being able to do that. There were some technical limitations, and so we did something else. So I don't know, should we talk about authentication today?
Authentication's always challenging and tricky. And last time when we talked about general permissions, we kind of said that's going to need to be a whole other show. I guess this is the whole other show we get to talk about it. So sure.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I read the story Tale of Two Cities. It was required reading, and it starts out with, "This was the best of times and the worst of times." I feel like account linking is the tale of two logins, and it's got some similarities there. So.
And I always find account linking on these systems to be, you think you know it. You're so close, and yet so far away.
So maybe you can share your experience on how Google does what we call account linking. I don't know. Do you officially call it account linking?
No, Google calls it account linking as well. So there's at least something we have in common. And I think actually this is a place we're going to have again a lot in common, and yet some interesting divergences. And it's funny because account linking was one of the things that I've helped a lot of people out on when it comes to the Google side of things. So Google currently breaks it down into three and a half different categories. So they have the best way to approach things is what they call Google SignIn. And this is directly coordinated with all of Google's other sign-in products. So that also works the same way with Google Sign-In for mobile, and it works with Google Sign-In for the web. So all of these products work the same together, and they work together. So if you have an app and you permit people to sign into one of them, and they do, they're automatically signed in across the board. So whether that's mobile, web, or voice, you sign in any one of those places, and you're good to go everywhere, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that is definitely something that we don't have on the Alexa side. It's one of those advantages of Google owning so many different properties, I think, right?
Yeah, well, Alexa has a pretty big property of its own that it's attached to, or could be attached to.
Yeah.
Then they have, and Google Sign-In and Google Sign-In for Assistant is actually relatively recent. It's only been a couple of years since it was first announced and put into production. They also have, that came in with that, is something they call, and this is convoluted name, OAuth-based Google Sign-In Streamlined linking, which is a nice mouthful.
That's that sounds like a great answer to some crazy question for voice developers.
And basically what it kind of boils down to is if you have an existing account system that you've got some flexibility with, and sometimes your users will sign in with Google Sign In for it, and sometimes they may not have, this is a good way to kind of bridge that gap. So it says, in some cases, you can streamline things. But in other cases, we can streamline things not nearly as much. And in some other cases, maybe we'll have to redirect the user to your website or to your mobile app to do the sign-in process. But as much as possible, let's try to make things easy, but we have some fallback methods where we can't.
All right, so let's pull back.
Let me give one more. Let me give one more, and that's the third level, where and this is what they originally released as account linking, and that's basically OAuth account linking.
Okay.
Where it says you run an OAuth server somewhere, because of course you run an OAuth server somewhere, because doesn't everybody run an OAuth server somewhere? And when the user needs to log into your service, we will redirect them to your OAuth service to log in. And kind of the big picture, and that's what hung people up for the longest period of time. And the biggest problem there is lots of people are used to setting up OAuth from the client side.
Yeah.
So, we'll just redirect to our authentication server that's running somewhere, and not thinking about, well, okay, what does it mean to run an OAuth server? And that's usually where people got tripped up.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to just pull back a little bit and say, well, why would we use account linking, right? What's the benefit? And the idea is that you already have some system that somebody's logging into, let's say before voice experience and was available. And so now you want to be able to access all their data, and you want, when they start up their skill or action, to, in essence, log in to that same account, so then that all that greatness that you already have available for that person is available to them. But you want to do it in a way that they don't have to log in physically every time that they start up the voice experience. And that's where account linking comes in. You do it once at the beginning of the experience, and then days and weeks and months, as long as you're using this voice experience, whenever you start it up, it implies that you're already logged in as that person, and then you have access to the information. And what it really means behind the scenes, more likely than not, is that you've got user records or transaction tables or other things that are needed to access to, and that's all keyed off to some ID. It could be the user's email address, it could be some unique ID, and your voice app needs to know what that piece of unique information is, so that it can call the APIs and act as if it's that person.
I would even pull out, just a slight step further, because there are probably lots of people who are developing voice apps for the first time, who are then saying, well, I don't have an existing account system. Why do I care? I mean, Amazon will give me a user ID, and Google, I can fake a user ID. That's not a problem. And I think the big reason is that account linking lets us tie that account to an identity, to a person. And even if we don't know their name, we might get their email address. There are things about the linked account that are important to us, so that if we're providing them customer service, and I kind of think of it as, if we're providing customer service and they send us an email saying, hey, I'm trying to use your voice action and it's not working, we can then say, well, okay, who are you?
Yeah.
And they need to give us some identifier that we can link them to something.
Right. So account linking, I'm sure this is probably similar to on the Google side. At least the account linking that we have on Alexa is based on OAuth 2, and it uses the uses the auth code grant to do that. And there are certain keys that you configure inside of the console for Alexa, saying this is where I go to get the information. This is where I can redirect to get to the login page. And there are some different keys and things to set up, but that's a one-time configuration setting that you make on the voice app in general, and then when they get their login prompt, then they're redirected, like you say, to some web page.
So you know what, that occurred. Let's actually take a step back again and kind of mention what is OAuth and why does it exist? You know, and I think one of the things a lot of people forget is OAuth 2, you know, stems from earlier generations trying to address some of the problems we were seeing with single sign-on.
Yeah.
You know, that people were creating accounts on every single system and needing some way to connect those systems together. So
in a secure way, right?
In a secure way, without having to say, well, okay, I need to send stuff on your behalf to Twitter. Why don't you just give me your password on Twitter and I'll do it for you? Or, you know, I need to send email on your behalf. Just give me your Gmail password and trust me.
Or your bank account login.
Right, you know, so what OAuth does is it lets and I'm gonna, let me take a time out and say that security professionals and OAuth experts will probably pick apart a lot of the terminology we're about to use. Tough. I think it's more important that we try to be clear rather than be, you know, follow the terminology exactly correctly. You know, so OAuth and OAuth 2 were ways to basically say, here's how I can grant a voice action, in our case, certain permissions on this other service somewhere.
Yeah.
And how that voice action can know that other service can say, here's who you're talking about, without having to hand over passwords, without having to hand over trust credentials, and letting these systems negotiate certain trust credentials on their own. Yeah. So, you know, again,
and to a certain degree, try to be as more transparent to the user of what information they're allowing to be handoff.
Exactly. I think one of the things people forget is that the auth in OAuth stands for not just authentication, who are you, but also authorization. What are you allowed to do? What access are you allowed to give? So OAuth 2 is this way that systems can coordinate with each other and say, okay, I trust this system, and the user is also trusting this system to some degree. Maybe not too much, but at least to some degree. And that negotiation can now take place. So we can get certain allowed information where we want it. And in these cases, it's basically, you know, permissions saying, yeah, you can tell this person who I am. And that's about the basics.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about how you kick off one of these authorization flows. So in Alexa, there's a number of different ways you can do it. When you go to the skill store, you say, oh, I like this skill, I want to go ahead and use it. You go to the detail page, you can enable it, and right there, it's going to tell you if account linking is required. So you can then at that point in time, you're either on your mobile phone or you're looking at skills or on a web page, and then you can go right there and do that account linking.
That's a useful way to get started.
Yeah. So it's in some ways, I think the flow could be a little bit better because it's just like this little button link saying you can account link here, and you're like, I don't know, do I want to?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, because on Alexa, you can either start up a skill and say, oh no, this whole thing requires account linking. There's nothing I can do here. So I'm just going to give you this message that, hey, I need to account link. Here's a card I'm sending you to the Alexa app. Go there, do that first before you go anywhere else, because there's really nothing you can do here without logging in. Or now that they've added this ability that you can start using this skill, and maybe there's things that you can do without being logged in. Maybe it's some general information or something, but then when you get to a point where they need to know who you are, then the account linking card happens. So that's kind of the second part would be you're starting in the voice experience, and you're asking to do something, and then you get to this point, once again, similar to permissions, where it's like, okay, stop everything here. I'm just letting you know you can't go farther until you link accounts. and sends you a card, and then you can go leave the voice experience and go to your Alexa app, whether it be web or mobile, and then go ahead and complete account linking at that point in time. So those are kind of the approaches that you could use to account link.
Yeah. Now that's pretty interesting in some ways, because on the Google side, they've always strongly encouraged this notion of letting people in without requiring account linking. Although there was always an option to say, starting this in Dialogflow, for example, starting through this intent requires account linking. But that was always heavily discouraged. And the review team would actually ding you in some cases and say, you know, look, we tested this and there are some things you can do without requiring account linking. Reconsider how you've structured this. And I've spent, in some cases, weeks trying to restructure to say, to have a demo mode and to have an example, you know, to have example mode so that you didn't need to log in before you can at least try things out. And I think users, people who are using your app, want to get in and get started and get a feel for it, and then say, okay, do I trust this enough to log in?
Yeah,
I think that's important.
And that is something to be aware of. If you kind of think about things like permissions, asking the user for permissions or asking for account linking, think of them as little speed bumps down the road. At some point, though, they might just get annoyed and turn around and go back and not, yeah.
And then I think actually leads to the next question: is how does Alexa handle if you don't account link when you're prompted to do so? What tools do you have to deal with it then?
It's basically just the same experience. You'll go back in the voice app and it'll say, hey, you need to account link. There's nothing really
that's interesting
that you can do about that. What does Google do?
Well, I mean, Google can let you do that, but there is an intent that gets triggered basically after account linking takes place, whether or not the person approved the link. And you'll find out, you know, either here's who this person is, here's a permanent identifier for them, or they rejected account linking. And then it's up to you to say, well, okay, what do I do now? And you can say things like, well, you didn't link, bye, and kick the person out, or give them the degraded experience and warn them they still have this degraded experience, or or just go into this endless loop saying, well, can you log in now, please? And that really now turns into what the conversation designer and the developer wanted to do. What experience do you want to have users when they say they don't trust you? How do you earn their trust?
Yeah, no, that is definitely a whole side of things on like you say, on the conversation design, and it highlights the fact that you should design your app ahead of time, or at least think about, okay, am I going to add account linking at some point, or and what should the experience be with and without, and try to figure that out before jumping in and just saying, oh, okay, now I'm going to add account linking, because that could require rework.
Right, and I think also you need to be clear, you need to have a clear focus on what are going to be the advantages of account linking. If you're just doing it to do it, well, that's not a really good reason. But if you're doing it so that you can do things like, present high score tables on a website, or you need to access their files in Dropbox or Google Drive, those are reasons why you need account linking. And
exactly,
there's not a lot you can do without them.
Yeah. So earlier I had mentioned the tale of two logins. In the Alexa's case, you've got your Amazon account that you then link to Alexa, and so there is the first account that you need to worry about is the login with Amazon account. So it's in the case of if you're going into the Alexa app, then you'll be prompted for a login for your Alexa app, and then you're already in the context of that this Amazon login, and then the second one is the actual account of the person that's in your other system, in your proprietary system, the one that is more likely than not being protected by OAuth.
And this is where the name account linking comes from.
Right. So you're linking two different accounts. And so everything that we've talked about on the Alexa side so far has been in this this idea that I go to my Amazon account first, and I get past that step, and now I want to link to this account that is my proprietary account. So Alexa has introduced something new called app-to-app account linking, which flips it around. So let's say you're going in and you log into your website or you log into your mobile app. So now you've done that first login, your proprietary login first, and they want to be able to provide some sort of a button or link that would then start up this this linking, which would then take you to the login with Amazon link. So then you do, so they flipped it around, and it sounds really great, and we've tried to do that, and it was new enough. And one of the problems is too is that if you're using like a third-party authentication provider like Auth0, which was what we were using,
I was going to say, and
wasn't working.
And let's take a moment to say that if you don't already have OAuth and you want to roll it yourself, don't, and use Auth0 instead. And there are others, but Auth0 is one of the best out there, I think.
Yeah. So, but unfortunately, we got 2/3 of the way through the whole flow, and we even reached out to Auth0. We reached out to Amazon, and got to a point where they couldn't do it with. You can do app-to-app account linking with Auth0, and I still don't understand all the technical reasons or why it would be implemented in such a way that you couldn't use a third-party provider. But it seemed like that you had to own your own auth server to be able to do stuff, to be able to do the app-to-app account linking. Which, if that's the case, then that severely limits its effectiveness.
It does, but that actually sounds similar. And I'm wondering just how much overlap there is between that and the OAuth-based Google SignIn Streamlined linking, which is the least streamlined name I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And because what it requires as well is modifications of standard OAuth endpoints to handle new token types.
That might be very similar, actually.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering if that's it. Because basically what that ends up happening is that under that name, which I'm not going to repeat again, Google sends over an ID token, and there needs to be directly to your OAuth server, and there needs to be some way for that OAuth server to handle it and do something with it.
Yeah, because it needs to be able to access, it needs to refresh. I don't know. That does sound very similar.
That does sound similar. Now. Yet another thing I don't have time to look further into. But the other thing that strikes me about it, though, is it sounds two things. One is that it sounds like it would work really well when you're trying to do things like, or use some features like quick links. Being able to set up auth and then send you right in.
Yeah. So interestingly, I'll talk about what we ended up doing instead, and then how that does play, because I was exactly thinking how quick links could help the process. So what we ended up doing, because we did like the idea, it seems to be less confusing to the user, because and it's a little less confusing probably on the Google side, because one, you have to enable an Alexa skill, then you get to invoke it for the first time, which is a little confusing. And when they're starting there from the very first time, and then they immediately hit something which they need to leave that experience to go do login someplace else, and then go back. It's just, oh my, that would be so painful to users to do that.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so what we ended up doing, we have a mobile app and a web app, and we wanted the person to be able to go through the login sign up process for an account, but then part of that setup would be one of the steps would be allow them to connect with their Alexa. And so what we ended up doing is generating a unique time-sensitive registration code. And what that basically does is says this registration code links to this special ID or this email address. That's the key to everything in the other system. And then they can go to their voice experience and say, Alexa, register code 12345, at which point it, invalidates that registration code, passes that information that you need, and then stores it in the data store that's specific to your account, what you're already using to persist data inside of your voice app. And then you're good to go. Now you've already, in fact, now you've actually only had to do one login.
Now let me actually, did you get that past the review team?
Yes.
Ooh.
We have a number of different voice experiences out there that do exactly that.
I'm not sure that would get past the Google review team, because Google review would look at that and say, you need to use account linking.
Yeah, we did have this one where it said we recommend that you use account linking. But it still passed. So
interesting, very interesting.
Maybe
hopefully the review team is not watching this right now.
Yes, don't pass this along to any review team that might be. But what that does, which I think was really cool, is the fact that when you do account linking, quick links with Alexa, specifically the custom task quick links, because you get to pass data along with it instead of just launch it. You could pass that unique registration code. And what happens when you do a click link is that it enables and invokes it at the same time, which you get past that issue. It introduces a login again, because what ends up happening is that when you click on the quick links, if you're not logged into your login with Amazon account, then that happens, and then you get presented with a list of devices that you can then send this to.
Yeah, but that's
okay. Then it kicks off, and what ends up happening is that you deep link right into that registration code, at which point you can then verify that the registration's happened, and you can say, you are now registered, welcome to blah, 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 and then they can start using the skill immediately.
It's a brilliant approach, and I think it's a great use of quick links for that as well. It is interesting though that I think the other thing that this was trying to do, skipping back half a subject or so, is duplicate what Google SignIn for Assistant is doing, because Google can just leverage that automatically, and they know that a lot of people are already using Google SignIn, which is in some ways related to what Google's trying to do with what they're now calling App Flip, which is a weird terminology that took me, I'm still not sure I fully understand it. I think, and it's still experimental. It has the notion, one of the things that you can do on both Android and iOS is log into an app and save its credentials as part of, in the operating system, so that your operating system is now managing those credentials. And this basically says, well, if you already have an app, either for Android or iOS, use those credentials for your account linking, and we won't make you log in again. We'll just flip over to the app, you log in however you log in there, and now we'll flip back to the voice, and you're linked.
Oh, that's interesting.
At least that's the theory. And it looks like it works with Google SignIn and the Streamlined whatever. But I haven't dug into those details too much.
Is that recently new? Then
that, I believe, was announced within the past year or so.
Okay.
So I don't know. We kind of breezed through that because OAuth, you can really get into the weeds when you're talking about authentication. So I'm sure we will revisit a lot of these topics again over time, and go into some of the details.
It'll see how it'll be interesting to see how things evolve too. If that's if people, I guess, if users are okay with the flow as more and more voice apps are out there, if they're okay, if there's going to be pushback, if there's going to be improvements, or are things have improved as much as they can be improved for a voice experience.
I think the other thing is, one of the things it exposes is how much OAuth relies on a visual component.
Yeah.
It relies on certain elements being able to go to somebody else's website. And we don't have that on voice. We literally can't do it that way. So I don't know, we'll see both how the auth landscape itself changes and how users work with it, and how we deal with permissions and lots of other stuff. But
right. One of the interesting things that that I know people are working on is using your voice as your identity, and
yeah,
being able to at some point get the recognition to a point where they know who you are, and you could have done these different authorization things someplace else, and then now you're just using your voice. I don't know, that seems like a day that's still quite a ways away, but
I think so. And I also have significant reservations about using biometrics for all stages of authentication.
yeah, it would have to definitely be something that pairs it with something else.
Yeah, but again, we're
yeah.
fortunately we're seeing two-factor authentication being more and more baked into things like OAuth. So
Yeah, the thing is, I wouldn't be opposed to starting up a voice app experience and having to then enter in a PIN or something that I get sent on my phone. I wouldn't be against that at all. That seems like that would not, that would be protecting, me, especially if I was wanting to put some of my financial stuff on voice.
Certainly it's a reasonable thing, and I think it can be done reasonably if it's tackled correctly. And
yeah,
that's always the big question.
No, exactly.
But auth is tricky. Auth is hard. I think seriously, most of the questions that I would get for a long time on Stack Overflow were surrounding auth issues and account linking, and how do I get permissions to do this, and so forth and so on. It's a tough problem, and doing it right requires a lot of careful work. So, I always encourage people, if you're going to do this, use the existing tools that are out there. Use tools like Auth0 where you can. Use Google Sign In, or sign in with Facebook, or Apple Sign In, or any of the existing tools that are out there, because doing it yourself is just hard to get it right. And
yeah, it is.
You really don't want to be the headlines next month on the, several thousand accounts in a data breach.
Right, that's true.
So on that cheery note, always, I am sure we're going to be revisiting this conversation again in the future as things change, and to go into more and more details, because it's the kind of thing I think as developers we need to get into the details on.
Yeah. Well, here's another episode of Two Voice Devs. So we're just talking a little bit about authentication and authorization. Hopefully you can use those tools in your apps, and we would love to hear from you on your experience or insights as well.
As always, if you've got questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. I think we're both pretty easy to get a hold of and pretty easy to talk with. So we look forward to having these conversations again with you. So
all right.
Thanks again. We're Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Take care, everyone.